Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits. The rebels. The troublemakers. The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Hey guys, Mark Mandel here. Welcome to episode number 7 of Customer Experience Unsung Heroes. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I'm so glad that you're here. Today is going to be a really good episode together. I'm so happy to share this with you. Let me tell you what's coming over the next 30 or 35 minutes so you'll know what to expect and when to expect it. Firstly, we're going to spend a couple of minutes while we're together here just talking about the show. And because there's some of you that might be out there either listening to this live stream now or as the playback later who may have just found this show and may not know its main purpose. So I thought I would just take a moment and explain what this show is about and why we do what we do. I'm also going to just touch on for a moment why I love that Apple ad from a moment ago. We'll talk about that. We're going to also spend some time right at the onset of the show talking about a book or two that I really love. And I'm going to hold up a copy of a brand new book to show you. We'll talk more about this in just a couple of minutes, and we'll kind of cover off on some of that. We'll talk about some customer experience industry events that are coming up and why I think they're going to be important for all of us to talk about. And then we're going to get right into the heart of the show and talk about, for the main reason why we're together here today, which is I'm going to introduce you to a good friend of mine for many years. His name is Brian Graves, and we'll talk about Brian and why he's here in just a few minutes. And then Brian and I are going to have a really just good, open, frank conversation about all these topics of kind of frontline customer experience and what it matters and why it's important and things that he's learned on his journey and why I think they're important that we hear them. And then when Brian and I wrap up our conversation, I'll wind down the show. We're going to give away a couple of things here as gifts to you guys. And then we'll talk about some next steps beyond that. But to get started, I thought, if you don't know this show, this Unsung Heroes show, I would take just a moment and just tell you kind of why I'm doing this show and why I think it's important. I'm doing this show, and this is the 7th of them that I've done, because, it's probably of all the shows I do the most personal and the most important to me. And what it's really about, think about folks who are doing the real work in customer experience work. These are not necessarily the people who are, at the industry conferences, up on stages, getting awards and trophies and all the recognition and spotlight time. They're back at the office running the ship. They're the guys who are making sure the engine room keeps cranking out, power so that everything moves forward. And I love taking these guys, these people who are in that engine room of customer experience and who are doing the hard work, and bring them for just a moment in front of you and introduce you to each other in ways that give them the recognition that I believe that they deserve. And so that's really the reason for this show and why I think it's most personal to me. These are my friends, and these are the guys who I think are doing the most honest, real work out there. As it relates to that Apple ad from just a couple of minutes ago, I'll tell you this. I still get goosebumps on my arms when I watch that ad. And I've seen that ad for 25 years now, and it still affects me. And what really affects me about it is the very last line of spoken monologue on that ad, which is, for the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I think a lot of us who do customer experience work, that's sort of our story. We want to be the guys making the dent, so to speak, in the universe by doing amazing things with our customers and making the world for our customers just that much better. And we want to be the heroes and really deserve to be the heroes for that kind of work. So that ad really just talks to me. It makes me feel like, yeah, that's why I feel like I do what it is that I do. and I wanted to share that ad. And I've been using that ad now every episode of this show when I've introduced it. So thank you for indulging me and letting me show that to you. I mentioned before this book, I want to talk for just a moment about this book. There's a gentleman who you may know, his name is Neil Woodson. He lives in the Maryland area. And what makes Neil, a good friend of mine is he's been in this customer experience area a long time. Most notably, he was a longtime CX leader at a company that did all the kind of the conference circuit, audio visual equipment and these big conference halls that produce these events. And he left there and retired there, went off and wrote this book, did some consulting work, and is doing some amazing things. But what really struck a chord with me, I want to talk about this book for just a moment. Hopefully you're not offended by this. Its title is Giving a Shit: How a Willingness to be Inconvenienced Can Transform Your Business, Work, and Life. And what I want to talk about this book, about Neil's book, and how it speaks to me, there's a trend going on right now in the customer experience, specifically technology solutions area. Think about, just pick your favorite voice of the customer, let's say software package. I don't care if you're a Medallia customer, a Qualtrics customer, an InMoment customer, almost any of these platform companies. Think about, there's been a trend. I don't know if you've noticed this trend. And Neil talks about, at least infers a lot about that in his book. The trend is those companies were all bought by these private equity investor groups in the last 2.5 years now, where some of them were public companies like Qualtrics and Medallia, others were privately held, but they all got bought by these private equity groups. And my friends, there's this kind of private equity, we'll call it a playbook, that happens when those companies get bought. And what happens from the customer's point of view is those companies appear, please excuse the phrase, they appear to stop giving a shit about you and me as the customer. And they really start to look after things like their investors and maximizing profit margins and being more transactional than ever before. You may have seen this in your relationship with one of those other technology companies. Pick whichever one, they've all been bought, right? And you'll see this playbook play out. And it really feels like, as customer-minded people like you and I, we feel that there is a lack of attention and a lack of caring and a lack of empathy coming our way as their customers since that event, since they got bought out. And it really adversely affects how we see those companies. And what Neil talks a lot about in his book is we need to give, we'll call it a poop. We need to give a shit about our customers and make them know we're willing to invest in those relationships, regardless of our financial constraints, regardless of other business and operating pressures. If we continue to care and show our customers that we care about them, they are almost guaranteed to care back about us. And the minute we start treating them like the next year's renewal transaction, that's how they're going to treat us. And I don't think either of us, you or I, as customer-minded people, want that to happen. So we need to look at what Neil's talking about in this book and really start to give a poop about customers in ways that make it clear and obvious to them that we're on their side. And the more we do that, my friends, I think the more we stand to win, and it's going to be really good to do that. Talking about these vendor companies, again, it could be the big guys like Medallia and Qualtrics. It could be like my friends at Opinator or Question Pro or InMoment or wherever you work today. We're going to call it customer experience conference season out there. I mentioned that Neil worked in the conference circuit as sort of the company behind all the AV stuff. But think about, a couple of the big conferences are coming up. We're sitting here now doing this show in late February 2025. So starting in March is when the big conferences start to roll out. We're going to see the Qualtrics conference in March. We're going to see the big Medallia conference in March. We're going to see the Customer Experience Professionals Association conference in April. We're going to start to see the upcoming Forrester conference and the Gartner conferences coming up. And I wanted to make sure that you knew that some of the ones that are coming up most imminently, Qualtrics and Medallia. Qualtrics is going to be March 18th, I think it is, and 19th and 20th, something in that bracket, in Salt Lake City, Utah. And the Medallia conference is the week after, the last week of March in Vegas again this year. And I'm going to have an opportunity to go to both of these events next month. And if you're coming too, message me. Let me know you're going to be there at either the Qualtrics X4 conference or at what Medallia is calling Experience 2025. And let's meet up for coffee, or I'll buy you a beer or whatever. Just let's go hang out and talk shop for a little while. I think that would be a lot of fun. So either you're going to be there, let me know, or I'll come look for you. But let's try to hook up when we're either in Salt Lake or in Las Vegas. So now, my friends, here's why we're here. We're here today, right now, here to have a conversation, my good friend Brian Graves and I. So I'd like to take a moment and give you a little bit about Brian and why I asked him to join me. Then we'll bring Brian on the stage here, and let's have a good chat with him. I had the opportunity to meet Brian, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but it was more than 10, when I used to be in the voice of the customer software business at an old company that used to be called Allegiance. And Brian was with a company called Redbox back then, as he was to this recently. Company's been through a lot of changes on his side. We'll talk maybe some about that. We'll see what happens there. But Brian and I met when he was at Redbox, and I put together a deal with Brian and his team to build out an early voice of the customer program. And we just kind of stayed in touch. Brian, is a frontline leader at the company, or for many years, he was there in that frontline leadership role, doing amazing work with their contact center, running their customer service operation. And, he's really in many ways at Redbox, he was the voice of the market, the voice of the customer in many ways. So let's bring Brian onto the stage here and we'll talk. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Good to see you. Thank you for hanging out here. So, Brian, I did my best to introduce you a moment ago, but I would love to hear your version of the story. So if somebody says, I don't know Brian, who's Brian? Could you give us kind of the 30-second kind of elevator pitch on Brian? Who's Brian, and kind of what's important to you?
It's funny. We had talked a little bit about answering a question like this, and real quick is I grew up in the contact center business. I started in college on the phone in Las Vegas for Citibank, and then have climbed my way up the call center ladder into corporate offices, and have worked across the CX spectrum in working tightly with BPOs in India, Mexico, the Philippines, all that stuff. So I've had a great broad career that took me places. My goal always was to visit the world, and this industry has taken me around the world at least 5 times.
That's phenomenal. But always tied to frontline leadership.
Yeah, I started off, like I said, in the contact centers, and then
moved up.
And early on. So the way I got into the corporate offices, I was working at Sprint PCS. I was helping get Sprint PCS off the ground when the wireless industry was exploding. And I had opened 2 call centers for them domestically, and then I got moved to corporate office, and was I'll never forget this. I was pulled into a guy we both know by the name of Alan Winters, who pulled me into his office and said, all right, I've got a new assignment for you. I'm going to have you run an RFP, and then I want you to go to India and check out what they're doing in outsourcing in India. And he goes, do you have any questions? And I go, I have 3. What's an RFP? Am I going to be able to ride an elephant? And can I see a tiger?
We all have our priorities, clearly.
And that kind of started me down that line. And so then I was I worked in India for a long time. I loved every second of it. I made some great friends over there. The experience changed my life. It helped me grow in so many different ways. And then from India, I was in Mexico for a while, and in Monterrey. Made great contacts down there. Worked with some of the biggest BPOs, what was Concentrix, and the Teleperformances, and all those guys. And then I was in the Philippines with both with Earthlink, with Microsoft, and then most recently with Redbox.
Wow. So, companies that I work with, Brian, are all about wanting to hear the customer's voice and understand kind of the customer, we'll call it needs, wants, sentiment, so that they know how to position for it. There's no, I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's no better listening post than voice of the customer by way of the agent. Agents know what's going on with customers. They take calls day in and day out, right? And they have a solid understanding of the good and the bad. There must be stories out there that you could tell that would curl people's toes about things they've heard, things that are important, things that worked well, things that didn't work well. Is there a story that made its way to your level in one of these organizations that you've been part of that's just memorable, that goes, well, I remember when there was such and such a situation, a customer called or many customers called, and we really needed the ability to address it, and here's how we kind of stepped into that?
Yeah. There's an old expression that you can judge a man's character by how he behaves when no one is watching. Right. And I'm a firm believer in that, and looking at companies and looking at how you run your organization is how do you train people to do what they do, or what empowerment do you give them? And a great example is we had a huge crisis incident when I was at Redbox when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And to the company's credit, the company was first concerned about our employees. Is everybody healthy? What do they need? All that kind of stuff. And then they started working on, what's going on with the company assets. Where are the kiosks? Or what's going on that? And they really started circling around that. And as you said earlier, I had the opportunity to be the voice of the customer within the organization. And I came in and said, we've got to worry about our customers too. And what I don't want to do is everything at Redbox was automated. So billing was automated, all that kind of stuff just happened automatically. If something went over a threshold, it happened. And I said, we got to turn in Puerto Rico, we got to turn it all off. And and I got no pushback at all. We ended up closing any outstanding balances a customer had from us. We ended up gifting any discs that were rented from us at the time. We just forgot about them, and then that way we didn't bill anybody, because I was like, we can't take money out of people's hands.
Yeah.
The critical thing, and to Galen Smith, who was our CEO at the time, and to Mike Chamberlain's credit, who was my COO, there was no pushback. They were like, okay, how do we make it happen? And then we worked cross-functionally and make those things happen. And that was really watching out for your customer and putting them first versus putting your business first. And I'm proud of what the company did, and I was excited about how everyone behaved when no one was watching, because no one even cared. The customer cared. They were so worried about themselves that no one even asked us for this. We just did it.
Yep. I'm thinking while listening to you talking, there's such an interesting angle I want to begin to explore a little bit, unpack a little bit with you here. And that is, this connection between customer experience and employee enablement and empowerment. I think about other folks that are running contact center organizations, and they struggle beyond imaginable levels, where people are literally coming into these teams, taking a job as an agent, going through training, getting kind of a new hire bonus if they have one, and within a month or two, they disappear.
Yeah.
And it's a constant fill the seat, because people either don't feel enabled, they don't feel empowered, they don't feel like it's a job that they really want, that they could kind of be their kind of the self that they want to be at work. And it's hard as heck job. But so many companies these days are struggling to really enable their staff. And now there's no news bigger than AI.
Yeah.
Right. And the challenge, though, is the likelihood that so many companies are getting out ahead of their skis a little bit with AI. And they're thinking, well, we right now, I'm making up the math. Right now, they could say I have a team of 800 agents across 3 shifts. I'm making up the numbers, right? And
Yeah.
But with AI, could we cut that 800 headcount to 350 and put kind of the level 1, level 2 stuff all automated? And I think that that's, in this moment in time, the biggest mistake that a company can make.
I agree.
What are your thoughts?
I agree. That's a short-sighted vision of this thing. It is, I am a firm believer that people want to do a great job, right? First and foremost, especially these young adults who we hire in contact centers, or these moms or whoever is coming in, they all just want to do a great job.
Yep.
And what gets in their way sometimes is management.
Good point.
This is where I think AI offers us so much, is that it can be used to enhance their capability versus in replacing it.
Exactly.
Right. And that you can do things with AI that will allow them to get creative and free up that time so they can do these things and really build that connection. The thing that misses in AI, and I've been reading some articles lately about it, is that kind of that emotional intelligence that people can bring. We haven't been able to duplicate that yet.
Right.
Right? And
we say empathy.
And it's understanding, and that's always easy to identify or show examples of that when you talk about crisis. We used to, at Redbox, because we were all around the country, we'd have people who were affected by a tornado, and it was very concentrated in this one area. And so, how do you train a staff of 1,000 people to deal with the 10 phone calls that may come in from that one direction, right?
Sure.
And so you really have to what AI can do for you is say, hey, you need to know this guy. Let me tell you what's going on in their area right now. We just had a tornado that came through. We see that the box in their area is offline, whatever it is. And that way, these people, you can connect to them and show that you have some empathy. That's how you personalize it.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, I don't know if I'm going to make you laugh or hate me for this, and maybe a little both. There's a story that I've told some people recently. It's not a new one. It's an old story, but it's kind of singed into my brain like it was recent and hurtful. I was visiting a client in the New York area, and this has got to be 15 years ago. And they had a fully insourced service team. They must have had 700 or 800 badged employees as their service center team, and it was in their main headquarter building, where they just took a floor and they kind of wiped out all the walls and put a lot of cubicles out there, and they have 700 or whatever stations in this big open space in the building. And they put one of these big, looks like a professional sports stadium scoreboards up on the wall of that floor, where they had all like the queue information. So they must have had a half a dozen call queues coming. You could see how many people were waiting and how long the average queue time was, and whatever the other stats were of the day. And I remember sitting with the gentleman who was kind of in your role to what you did for Redbox at their company. And he said, I'll show you something interesting. And he went to his desk and he typed on his computer keyboard some cryptic code. And all of the queues that were up on that board went to 0. And I said, what did you just do? And he said, I hung up on 1,100 people. And I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, well, firstly, don't worry. They'll call back. I said, okay. I said, but why? He goes, well, and he was really honest, maybe too honest. And he said, as a leader, my compensation is metriced on queue time, amongst other things. And he said, if I can flush the queues, it shortens the queue time because it goes back to 0 again. And he said, I will get more bonus money at the end of the month by hanging up periodically on customers. And my brain just kind of scrambled itself when I heard him say that. I was like, I don't understand this at all. But it's like bad behavior, but bad behavior driven by, artificial things like bad measurements. It's like when you hear the stories about, for every organization that drives shorter average handle time, you get a Tony Hsieh story with a 6-hour phone call for Zappos.
Yeah.
Right. And the question really means is there a right and a wrong? Is it just opinion? What do you see? What kind of, how have incentives, what stories have you heard about your peers at other companies?
Yeah.
And incentives.
Oh, I used to talk to people about things like CSAT and all that kind of stuff. I said, I can drive your CSAT. I can gain you 20 points tomorrow. What we're going to do is everybody who calls in, we're going to give them $10. Right? I go, but that's not you've got to balance this stuff in with looking at the business and looking at the customer from both points of view. So this is a total balance game.
Yep.
And what I have done in my past is we started looking at agents and their incentive programs, all that kind of stuff. We never incentive people purely on CSAT, right? I started balancing that on with, okay, let's look at a ratio between how much money are they giving away and how are they getting there? Are my biggest CSAT guys giving away the store, or are they really solving the problem?
Exactly.
Right. And balancing that type of thing. Those are the things you look at, is because how you drive or reward behavior is what you're going to get.
They say
exactly like what you just talked about. Right.
Yeah,
and,
what's the saying, Brian? You could expect what you inspect.
Yeah. Right. It goes along those same exact lines. And that's why, looking forward as to where we're going as an industry and what we're going to be capable of, is I am so totally excited about everything that's coming in our direction. It's scary at the same time because it's kind of unknown, and people are doing exactly what you said. They're putting the cart a little bit above the horse, and they're looking at the wrong kind of metrics. They're just looking at it as a cost savings. What we've really got to do is build this organization and build this industry that CX is a differentiator that drives revenue and drives business. It's not a cost thing that preserves it. Well, it does do that, but it's got to do this other thing as well.
I was having that exact conversation with somebody on Monday of this week when we talked about the fact that their contact center team has always in their company been seen as on the L side of the P&L, right? It's a sunk cost.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way that they get rewarded and recognized is by reducing the operating cost of that sunk cost. Right. And we said, what if we could reframe this from being a kind of a cost to at least a balanced picture with upside and profitability, not through cost abatement, but for maybe make it like an engagement team and not a support team, and look for opportunities to cross-sell or upsell or promote new offerings to the business in ways that drives, greater stickiness or higher customer lifetime value, or, some variable that's about driving more upside, not just diminishing the downside.
Yeah, right. It is. It was a time early in my career when I was doing the India work, and we were building those contact centers in India, and you'd go into the classes, and the guys they'd all be afraid. They'd go, "Oh, I want to change my name. I want to use Mary as my name, or I want to use Brian as my name." And I'd be like, "We're not doing that."
Yeah.
I go, "There's a few things I want you to realize is that if we have to hide that we're here, we shouldn't be here." Right. And second, here's where you play a game. People in the United States don't know very much about India. Mm-hmm. And their first exposure to your culture and your people is going to be you.
Yep.
And so I want you to think of yourself as an ambassador. right?
Yep.
For your country, for our company, for all this kind of stuff. Here's your flat phrase I want you to use is when they start saying, where are you? And I want you to say very proudly, I'm in India. And doesn't it sound like I'm next door?
Mm-hmm.
And immediately that'll change everything.
Yep.
And they tested that out, and it was a beautiful thing because it then immediately moved over to why you called.
Exactly.
Right. And it's kind of that same way that we have to look at where changing the parameters on how you think about AI is how does AI become the ambassador for our organization, not just a cutting tool for our organization.
100%. You know, I mentioned the bad story a minute ago about the guy who hung up on 1,100 people. I thought I would come back with a more positive, uplifting, quick story. And this is a company that I have a number of close friends at now, and I'll just talk about them a little bit for just a second because it's a great positive example. There's a not-for-profit group headquartered in Colorado called Compassion International. And I don't know if you, Brian, or the folks listening in have ever heard of Compassion International, but they're a not-for-profit that raises money to help feed, clothe, and medicate children around the world where they're in some challenging situations. And very successful what they do. They're an absolute blessing to these populations of kids who frankly, they need the help. But they reach the kids in these faraway countries who are supported through Compassion's generosity and their donors' generosity will eventually age out of the support program, right? Where they hit, let's say, 18 years old and they're no longer eligible to receive these funds to be able to continue to get the support. And so these families, and let's say in the more wealthy parts of the world who donate the money, are reassigned a different kid. Now, the interesting part of that story is that they have a fascinating practice at Compassion where they take these kids that have aged out of the support program and they offer them jobs at these contact centers to become the next generation of agent or representative. And they encourage these young adults to tell their own story to the people who they talk to on how this program may have saved their own life or changed their life and their family's lives. And it creates this honest connection to the person on the phone like you can never imagine. Right? And people are just picking out their wallets and going, how much should I give you? Right? I mean, it's just a remarkable story and how they continue to support these young adults through employment, and the employees help support the organization through connection and storytelling.
Yeah.
It's just
so where do you see us putting AI in? And I keep going back to AI because that's the hot thing right now, and it's easy and stuff like that. But really, as we look at customer experience and all this technology that's coming our way, where do you see that fitting in to build those types of relationships?
I'll tell you through yet another story because I like stories. I remember I've been an Apple fan. If it was evidenced by the fact I showed their TV ad in the beginning of this show, I've been an Apple fan a long time, many, probably 40 years now. And I remember a interview where they interviewed Steve Jobs 40 plus years ago. And he was talking about the growth of the personal computer at the time. And they said, well, tell me what role you think personal computers are going to play in the future. And Steve, I'm paraphrasing this. I'm probably going to get the details wrong, but it doesn't matter. Steve made reference to a study that was done by a magazine, Scientific American magazine at the time, where they studied natural locomotion of different animals around the earth. In other words, how efficient is a person? How much energy does a person require to walk? How much energy does a bird require to fly? How much energy does a dog require to run? And he talked a lot about how, naturally speaking, the most energy efficient creature was a cheetah, and how it could run very quickly while expending very little energy to be able to run fast. He said, but, and here's the important part, the human being came in like 29th on that list in terms of efficiency. He said, but you take a human being and you put them on a bicycle, and they become number one by far. And he talked about the personal computer at the time being, as he called it, a bicycle for the mind, where it creates these extra efficiencies to help us do whatever it is that we're trying to do more efficiently. And I think AI now comes along, and while sure, some people might think it's going to replace me, I'm going to be out of work because of AI, the reality is maybe different. And I think this is just another way to create efficient locomotion, right? It's about saying, can I do my job better and more superpowered because of AI and not feel threatened by it? And whether that means specifically in a contact center organization, doing things like next best action, obviously plays a role where the AI can listen to a call as it's happening, and in some ways make little screen pops to say, offer this, do this, recommend that, and help coach me in the moment of the conversation. But also make more efficiency for me, because think about one of the big time sucks is after call wrap-up work.
Yeah.
We all are expected to do it, right? We have to code our calls. But if we could take that coding and that note-taking and automate that, where all I as the agent have to do is kind of scan through and go, yep, looks good, click. And take what might be a 1 minute exercise and make it a 5-second exercise.
Yeah.
Right? And have it be efficient and have it be right.
Yeah.
Right? Think about when we used to comp people on handle time and they were coding calls manually after a call. Brian, I could almost guarantee you the number one code for any call was other, because it was the first one on the list that they could pick.
Miscellaneous, yeah.
Right, because it's like code number 1000. They go to the drop-down list and they go, yep, that one. Yeah. Right, and so they're off the hook. They did what they were expected to do to put a code on a call.
Yeah.
Right, and the problem with that is it's not of any value to the company the way it was done. So if we could take AI and create some offload of some of the busy work, and then make me in my real-time interactions with customers more effective by helping to coach me in the heat of the moment, I think those are two A, big wins, and B, doable today with high certainty.
Yeah.
Right? I think
I love that.
These are easy layups, I think, things that they could be done.
The other place where I see it fitting in really well is in quality, in quality coaching, right? Is you go from, what do we do now? Maybe 5 to 10 phone calls someone listens to for them, and they score them on these quality forms. Yep. And with AI and technology enhancements, we can now go through 100% of what they're doing and identify areas of strengths, areas of weakness, and then tailor that back to bring them up.
Yep.
Right. And it's just, there's so many great things that can come out of this to really enhance the customer experience from there.
I think you're spot on. I think that these are very real world, very doable, not future science fiction experiments.
Real, they're here today.
These are very real deal kind of things. I just have a couple other things I'm really looking forward to doing. And you and I have talked a lot already about how you see and I see the world, how we see AI certainly playing a role and where we think it makes sense, why it matters. Can we point the camera for a minute to the future? And I'm just going to ask you just to speculate for a minute. What do you see or hear, whether it be technology or otherwise? What's coming out in the next year or two that you may have heard rumblings about that caught your attention and really, really excites you? What do you see as the next big frontier?
It's interesting. I'm starting to hear a phrase, intelligence outsourcing.
Interesting.
Right. And it's the combination of finding yourself an outsourcing partner with technology and bringing the kind of experiences we're talking about together, and that you're looking at your partner more as an asset to your company instead of an expense line.
Interesting.
And how are they going to help you build that relationship? And you push those responsibilities to them, and you incent them on building that one-on-one relationship that customers are craving today, based off of their capabilities, not just their human capabilities, but their technology capabilities.
Yep.
Right. And I am real excited about where that's kind of going, and exploring that more myself. I've got, like I said, this is something I'm just starting to hear about. I'm also, there's a line of thinking on outcome-based intelligence also, right, where you think more about, instead of the task, you think about the outcome. And all this is moving kind of in that direction, and I think that's exciting. Even I was just talking to one of my kids about it the other day, when she's just starting her career, and she's like, "Well, Dad, where do I go with this?" Like, here's what I want you to start thinking about. I want you to think about not the task they're asking you, but the outcome they're trying to get you to.
Yeah.
Right. And how you help. And she's like, okay. Because what did she say? I'm going in for my review, and I come in 15 minutes early every day. And I go, and I had to break her heart a little bit. And I go, honey, so what? Right? What does that do? I go, so when you go in, don't tell them that you come in 15 minutes early. Tell them, I come in and I get this done. Now, I do it because I come in 15 minutes early. But here's what I'm doing for you.
Sure.
Right. And talk about the outcome of what you're doing, not just the task. And she was like, oh, wow. I could hear the cog turning in her head. And
so that sounds like some of the most solid dad advice I've heard anybody give their kid ever.
Well, I'll never forget, or very early in my career, I was working for my family's business, and I got the title of vice president. My dad happened to be the president, but I got the vice president. And I was talking to my dearest friend in the whole world, and he looked at me and said, so what? Your dad owns the company. Yeah. And it crushed me. But then I had to walk away from that and go, yeah, he's right. Now I hate that.
I get it. Believe me, I get that. I thought when I was a high school or college kid, my plan was either to work for myself forever, which I didn't really get much of an opportunity until recently to do, or work for my family.
Yeah.
And which I chose for a variety of reasons not to. There was always a family business, and I was very separate from that. I have a younger brother who's brilliant in his job, and he went into the family business and has soared beyond imagination in that. But I can tell you that, it was offered to me as well, and I turned it down because I wanted to kind of make my own path and not feel like I'm following dad, for lack of a better way of saying it.
When I worked in that business, I left that business because I had to make a hard decision. I could love my career, I could love my dad, but in this position, I can't do both.
Yeah, they don't go together.
I decided to love my dad.
Yeah.
And later on, he was, years later, just, maybe just a couple of years before he passed, he was like, I can't believe you ever left the business. Do you know what that you could have grown that business into this? I go, Dad, if I'd have stayed there, two things would have happened. You'd be dead and I'd be in jail.
Neither of those are great outcomes. Talking about outcomes-based businesses, that's not a great outcome. Not a great outcome. I just have one more thing I really want to touch on briefly with you before we wrap this conversation up, Brian. I've loved this so far. Before we hit the record button here, we're talking about companies that we are excited about, and you're talking about your love of Disney and kind of the theme parks and growing up near Disneyland. Is there a company that, as you sit here now, in your life at this stage, that you look out, whether it be one you've been part of or just one you know about, that you really get inspired by? Is there somebody go, boy, these guys are just firing on all cylinders, whatever that means to you?
Yeah, there's a few. We all have the almost, I would call them cliche companies, right? If you want to talk about customer experience, you talk about Disney. You want to talk about efficiency, we talk about Amazon. And I am not taking away from what they've done in the past and what they're doing today, right? Those are all excellent examples of those things. But there are some companies that I've kind of got my eye on that are little known, that I think could change some landscapes in the industries that they're in. And there's a company called Mecca that is down in Australia, and it's a beauty retailer. And they're taking a different approach on their stuff. They're combining physical retail excellence along with an emphasis on education and personalization. Wow. And what they're doing is they're building themselves into a beauty destination for people in that area, where they will craft your cosmetic, they will educate you on it, they will do all these things. And it's an interesting concept. They just crossed my radar, I would say, within the last 48 hours. And so something I'd say, let's take a look at it and see what they're going to do, because they're going to try to position themselves to take over the world that way, right? And it goes to talk about the critical nature that CX is going to play in the growth of companies in the future, right? It's going to be about that differentiating experience that a company brings to the table. 1 million companies sell makeup. 1 million companies, 1 million retailers do, 1 million manufacturers. But how do you take it and you change the CX of it to make yourself stand out? This is an example of that type of thing.
That's cool. I would answer my question. I grew up as a baseball fan, more so than most of the other sports. And in the last couple of years, I found myself following an unusual part of baseball. It's a very small part of baseball. There's one guy on one team, not part of the normal organized sports league. You may have heard of the team is called the Savannah Bananas. Mm-hmm. Right? And I joke about, they're kind of the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. Yeah. Right? And they're all about the fan experience. They're all about engagement. They're all about connecting. They're all about making it fun. They're taking a game in baseball that younger kids these days think is long and boring and have no appreciation for, and they make it fast moving and fun and exciting and acrobatic and colorful, and they apply music to it, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. No different than when I was a little kid and my mom and dad took me to see the old Harlem Globetrotters, and Meadowlark Lemon and Curly Neal were there, throwing that basketball around to Sweet Georgia Brown. Right? I mean, that's for me the Savannah Bananas in baseball these days, and
they're a great example. Right, they're a great example of making what is, I grew up as a Dodger. We were season ticket holders for the Dodgers. I grew up going to all those games and stuff, and I love that experience. But they have changed it, and I love watching their reels come across my social media feeds, and I think that they're an outstanding organization. There's somebody I would take the time to go see.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, listen,
when
Brian,
are you coming out here for spring? Out here to Scottsdale for spring training?
I'll tell you, the last time I tried to come to Arizona for spring training was March of 2020. And about March of 2020, it was an interesting year, or an interesting month, right? I mean, everything shut down on like the day before I was supposed to fly out to Phoenix. Yeah. They said, we're not flying because there's something going on, and we're going to kind of shut down travel. And then they declared it a pandemic, and everything stopped.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. I was in the Caribbean,
and so in some ways I said it must be my fault, and so I decided I'm not gonna deal with that anymore. Hey, I've loved this conversation, Brian. I'm sure there's some people that might be listening either now to the live chat that we've had here, or on one of the playbacks where they say, "Boy, I want to talk to Brian." How the heck do people find you? What's the best?
The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Is you can follow me. I publish regular articles on what's happening in the industry. Feel free to follow me, comment, or reach out directly. I'm happy to talk to everybody and anybody about what's going on in the industry and kind of how I see things panning out in the future.
And that's how you and I have stayed connected over the years. And I know myself, I'm very grateful to you for you being so welcoming into kind of your universe out there. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I would love this call today. I can't wait. You got to figure out how to get me on for another one. We got to have part 2.
I might be looking for a permanent co-host.
You got it.
Brian,
we'll fix the video thing. Whatever's going on my side with this choppy video thing, I'm gonna have to go fix this.
You got to get faster internet at the house. You'll be all set.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Brian, thank you for hanging out with my friends and me today. Thank you for everything. It's so good to talk with you. I'm gonna take just a couple minutes while we're wrapping up the show here, friends, just to make sure I say adequately, Brian, thank you for everything here. And my friends, thank you for hanging out with Brian and me here. Just a quick couple of housekeeping things. We're going to send Brian just to the side for a minute so I don't take more of Brian's time. Thanks, here.
Mark.
Thanks, Brian. We're going to, as I said, I'm going to be coming to the Qualtrics and Medallia conferences in a few weeks in March. If you're coming to either, please do look me up. Let's see if we could get together and get a bite to eat or just a drink or a cup of coffee or whatever. I'd love to see you when we're out in Salt Lake City or in Las Vegas. Please do try to find me. If you want a copy of my friend Neil's book, I'm trying to focus here on the camera. It's a fabulous book, and Neil was kind enough to give me a small box of these to give away to you guys. So if you want a copy, just ping me and say, give me a copy of Neil's book, and I'll make sure it's on its way to you as Neil's gift and my gift to you. And, we have a couple of other programming shows. I mentioned a moment ago the Qualtrics conference coming up. This next month of doing a show like this, I'm going to do live from the show floor. We're going to try to live cast it from the conference if technology gods, line up in favor for that. So that's at least my plan now to do that. So my friends, as I started off the show by saying, thank you. Thank you for being on this journey with me and with my friends. Thank you for hanging out for the last 45 or 50 minutes today. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next call we have coming up. So until then, I'm going to simply say thank you for everything, and we'll see you real soon. Take care, my friends.